We chose to present Robert's story because he was the first person in Western Australia to actually receive what we call community living plan funding. And this was received about 4 years ago. And this funding allows people with disabilities to essentially use money in very flexible ways, like subsidising their rent and their living arrangements and so forth. So, but that's not the beginning of Robert's story. The beginning of Robert's story is this is a man who's actually lived for 15 years in the community with no funding most of that time. And it's really a story of struggle, ups and downs, and even ups and downs in this year, but it still his story still continues. If you behave yourself and you bear with me through this talk, I will show you some pictures at the end that will show you that his situation is a real situation and he's a living, breathing human being. Okay. And now Robert is a 41-year-old man today, and he's living in his own apartment in Northbridge, and Northbridge is pretty much smack bang in the middle of Perth. It's quite a built-up area. There's a lot of cafes there, a lot of restaurants, a lot of nightclubs, and it's the place he wants to live in. It's a very short walk to the local cafes and places that he works at. He lives with two men. They're both 38 years old, and one of them is called Ben, and Ben is a printer by day and a drummer by night in a local band. They're called the Russian Winters. You can actually download their stuff on iTunes, so it's a real passion. So he's lived with Ben for 7 years. Chris also works for Telstra, is the other co-resident. He's a single dad, divorced. He, by night, is a guitarist in another band. They're not sort of part-time musicians, they're serious musicians, these people. And, Robert today is a quiet, confident man, and he really knows what he wants. When I recently asked him what he wanted in his life, he said, "I want to be free to live my own life." When I go to the beginning of Robert's story, you'll hear why it's significant that he can even say that. Now, today he likes music. He follows, likes a lot of 1980s, 1990s music, and he makes up his own lyrics to the tunes. Soft Cell Tainted Love has become Painted Love. Green Day's I Want to Be a Minority has become I Want to Be with Dorothy. Dorothy is an attractive woman who works at one of the local cafes. And the former CEO of Van 8 or 9 years ago, his name was Barry, and he's retired now. But Robbie will sing the song, the John Mayer song, Your Body is a Wonderland, and he'll say, Barry is in Wonderland. He likes travelling. He's been to Thailand, Malaysia, Indonesia, New Zealand, many times to the eastern states, to Melbourne, Sydney. And really, he's a valued worker, collects keys and key-related paraphernalia. He's got a really great sense of humour. Once I was doing gardening with him many years ago, and it was sort of had a reflected window, and you could see it's like a mirror. And we were gardening away, and he stopped, and he was looking at himself in this mirror, and he said to me, "Are you happy?" And I said, "I'm very happy." And I said, "Are you happy?" And he said to me, "Both the Roberts are happy," looking at his reflection. Now, in the early days, when I first met Robert, it was 1996. He was 25 years old then. He was the oldest of 6 children from an Armenian ethnic background. His family had never accessed formal support services. Essentially, he'd gone to a special school, and they had looked after him at home. He had no friends, not one single friend outside of the family. He was very shy and withdrawn. He spent his days at home completing jigsaw puzzles and sorting and resorting his very vast collection of keys. And the keys were important to him because he used to get frustrated with other people's keys, and he would steal them and break them in half. But his own keys he would keep very carefully. For him, the keys were a sign of his desire to have his own place, that he could have a key that fits in the door. Now he has an intellectual disability and undiagnosed autistic behaviours. He had limited verbal ability. He did not really speak spontaneously to people. He would only repeat back the last part of a sentence that you'd say to him. So if you said to him, "Are you feeling good today?" he would say, "Good today." That was the extent of his ability to communicate. If the phone rang in front of him, it would just keep ringing. He would ignore it. Now, his mother approached our organisation. She knew nothing about us. She only approached us because we live in the suburb of Hillary's, and she was living in the suburb of Hillary's. She thought it's the nearest organisation. And she said her son was bored. He needed to get out of the house, needed some friends. Can we help? So nobody at this stage sort of predicted that this would really, this first contact, that this story would evolve from this first contact. We got involved with Robert because we saw a lot of potential in him, and to put it bluntly, a lot of wasted potential in Robert. We decided to, given he had no friends, we introduced him to a couple of new Link people that I spoke about in my first talk, and there were a couple of young women about his age, in their mid-20s, and they enjoyed bushwalking, bike riding, cooking. They did some craft activities. And these started to evolve into day trips to Rottnest Island. Rottnest Island is about 15 kilometres off the coast of Perth, and you can ride around it with bicycles. There's no cars there, and it's just a beautiful spot. He started to spend weekends with his Link people, so he would go and stay with them for Saturday and Sunday. They'd do some cooking, might go out on a Saturday night. And the next big step for him was his holiday, which was a trip to Bali, as a lot of young Australians do. And when he came back from his trip in Bali, that was it. He did not want to go back and live with his mother. His mother's a very nice person, but she's a mother. And so we sort of wondered, how would we go about supporting him in this living arrangement? Now essentially we took him to many places across Perth, and he decided he'd like to live in a suburb called Subiaco. I don't know if you follow football, but all the matches for Australian football occur in Subiaco at the Oval there. It's a kind of a leafy green suburb, inner city suburb, an expensive and attractive place to live. And it was, the reason he liked Subiaco was because he could access it by foot. Everything could be accessed by foot. He didn't know how to catch a bus. If he went to a bus stop, there was a 25% chance he'd get the right bus, and 75% chance he'd end up on the other side of Perth. And this was despite time and time again trying to show him how to use a bus. It was just something he couldn't do. I used to follow him on one occasion, hiding behind letterboxes and pillars, and he still didn't make it. So essentially he needed to access things by foot, and Subiaco was perfect for that. We had no funding whatsoever for Robert. We put an application in for funding. The application came under it was called accommodation support. It came under something called the Combined Application Process, or CAPS funding, to use an acronym. And he was not funded at all. He was so ready to live in his own place. The application was completely determined by the capacity of the parents to look after the son or daughter. That is generally their age and state of health. The person with the disability was not in the equation. The people who were getting funded were generally people in their 50s, and the parents were 6 months away from death. And there was no way that Robert was going to get funded under that system. It was not going to happen. So we sort of thought, how can we he's ready, we can't wait. How can we make this happen for him? We looked at how much we were spending on him for respite or breaks, and we discovered it was $10,000 a year. So we took this figure to the Disability Services Commission of Western Australia, and we said, we can spend $10,000 a year for him to remain living with his parents, or we can spend $10,000 for him to go and live in the community. Well, it wasn't a difficult decision. In the end, they decided we could quarantine $10,000 for him to use in community living situations. Further, we said, we don't want to use the money to pay people. We want to use the money in a creative way to support his living arrangements. We want to support freely given devotions for him. That is real friendships. And we were so small, a small drop of water in a very large bucket. They let it go. They said, okay, on this occasion, we'll let it go. And so we had $10,000. With that $10,000, it enabled us to rent a place for him. He selected the place. His name was put on the lease. We subsidised the rent with the money that we had. But the question was, how do we attract people to come and live with Robert? He didn't really have a lot of friends. So we thought, what shall we do? Well, we put an ad in the newspaper. We thought a lot of young people, when they're young, they pull their resources together and they'll share a place. And we did exactly that. We advertised for a girl or guy to share with someone living in Subiaco. We attracted a lot of inquiries. Most people were completely unconcerned that it was to co-reside with a person with a disability. And we had a lot of people to choose from. And Robert selected the people that he wanted, and they moved in with him. There was no rocket science about it. The planning was probably quite minimal. We just did it because he was ready. Now, when the co-residents moved in, things started to sort of develop from there. And we managed to find him some work. He was working with a tree lopping company. They would come in the morning, pick him up, and they would go off and lop trees. And his job was to pick up the smaller branches around where they were lopping the trees. Quite risky sort of work, but he wanted to do it. And after some time, we felt something wasn't going right. And the feeling it wasn't just a sort of a gut feeling, it was because we knew Robbie. We knew what he wanted in his life. And he was not completely happy. And we wondered why. And it started to become evident to us that Robert was the nature of the relationship with him and his co-residents could have been better. They were very paternal, maternal in their relationship with him. It was not an equal relationship. They were sort of de facto parents. He's already got a real mum, who's a real mum, and he didn't need another mother and father to live with. And there was a bit of a push-pull factor going on weekends, where they would encourage him to go and spend the weekend with his parents, and the parents were kind of pulling him because they kind of liked him there to be on the weekends. And we were concerned by what we saw, and we both myself and the CEO at the time, we both came to the same conclusion: we had to start again. The co-residents would go. We made that decision. We started from after 2 years, we restarted the whole community living plan for Robert. He needed a fresh start. He wanted to live in Northbridge, which for him was more exciting. After 2 years in Subiaco, he wanted something else. And we had a person who, by 2 years, he had built up some relationships, and he had a friend called Ryan, and Ryan moved in with him, and the two previous co-residents were gone. So it took a lot of courage for us to do that. When I look back on it, it was the right thing to do. Many organisations I know would be afraid to do that, but it was not meeting his need. And when he moved to Northbridge, we were still we needed 2 co-residents to share the rent. It's better to have 2 people because they bring in a greater number of networks are connected with them if they don't know each other. And we found that we just advertised, and we got a young lady who was a lead singer in one of the local rock groups, and very, very intelligent person and very kind-hearted. And she lived with Robert for 4 years. And in that time, she formed such a strong friendship with him. She took him one Christmas to meet her family in New Zealand for 3 weeks. She took him hill tribe trekking in northern Thailand with her boyfriend. It was the 3 of them. And it was a beautiful friendship, and it was one we encouraged, and it flowered in its own energy. Okay, we did not impose on that. Some organisations I know would have tried to turn that into something a bit more formal. We just let it develop. But time went on, and she decided that she wanted to move on, Jasmine. And we thought, well, what's going to happen now, with the change of co-residents? Lo and behold, we had a few inquiries from people saying they'd heard that she was moving out and they wanted to move in. So there was no advertising at all occurred. Someone who already knew Robert moved in with him. And this person was the keyboardist in the band. So the music continued for Robert. And whilst he was with his name was Francis, he toured many times with the band when they came over here to Sydney and Melbourne, and they did the pub circuits. They had him employed doing the sound equipment, testing the sound equipment. Where he lives, underneath, they've only got 1 car between the 3 of them. They've done the carport out like a sound recording studio with soundproofing, and they jam in there and record stuff down there, and Robert participates in that with that band. Now, Franz moved out eventually, and we thought, oh, well, here we go, we're back to sort of square one. And then the drummer approached us, who is Ben. He moved in with Robert, and he's been there 7 years. And he calls Robert his brother. There's a tremendous friendship there. And he was co-residing with another young woman who was happened to be a social worker. not by our design, it was just a bit of bad luck. And she lived there for 2 or 3 years, and when she moved out, we get another inquiry from a person in the original band. He's the guitarist, which is Chris, who lives there now. Now, all these people who were in this band they're now playing in other bands. They've all split up, but they're in separate bands, but still pursuing their music together. And they've still kept their association with Robert. Now, a tremendous development came when he moved to Northbridge, and we found there was an abundance of work in that area. One day he was walking down the road with a friend, and he saw an advert outside of a food hall. They wanted someone there to clean the tables, and so that the link person went in there, and they applied for the work, and he got the job on the proviso that he would come with a support person. I said, of course we will support that. And it was embarrassing because we were paying the support person $10 an hour. He was getting $14 an hour for cleaning the tables. And after the first day, the employer said, you don't have to come back again to the support person. You know, Robert's fine. You can do this job, no worries. So he worked there for quite a period of time. And what happened was it was a change of ownership, and he lost his job eventually after a few years. But this was a place with an abundance of opportunity. We linked him with an interesting man who we randomly came across. His name was Avi. He was an army medic from Israel, and he knew a lot of street people around Northbridge, mainly street entertainers and so forth. And he introduced Robert to a fire eater, you know, the guy swallowing fire. And the fire eater had some friends who were Hare Krishnas. And they said, yeah, he can come and work with us in the restaurant and do a bit of voluntary time. And he did that work for 7 years. He worked in the Hare Krishna restaurant in the middle of Northbridge, just down the road from where he lived, because he lived in Subiaco and in Northbridge, where the opportunity was. And he had a bit of a dispute with some employee who came into that job, didn't get on with him, and decided to quit. There was a cafe next door. They heard he was quitting. They offered him a job the next day, Francine's cafe. And with time, through the links, he made contact with a person who had a garden centre in Northbridge. It was specialised in pot plants for inner city apartments, so sort of like for balconies and things like that. And he got work there as well. And he wasn't sure how to get there because it was a good sort of 15-20 minute walk. But he knew halfway there was a bookstore he often went to, and there's a bookbinder worked there, and the bookbinder agreed they'd have a cup of tea or coffee, and from there he would walk with Robert to the garden centre and make sure he got there. And that was completely not coordinated by us, I should add. Now, Robert has an obsession with keys. It was initially quite negative, and me trying to be a psychologist, I thought I'd try and go about trying to extinguish that sort of behaviour, and in the end it was impossible, and I realised what a mistake I had made, and I needed to go with the flow with Robert and his keys, because his keys yielded an opportunity. He would go every day to a key cutting place to get a key cut, a random key. And the chap there thought this was a bit odd that this man was coming there every day to get a key cut. And he offered him a job, cutting keys. And he's still doing that job today, Robert. And so, you know, experts do not know what they're doing sometimes. I remember once he had his keys out, and I asked him if he could put them away, and he turned to me, looked me in the eye, which is something he had never done, and said, "No." It's the first time he had ever said no in his entire life, as far as I realise or understand. So this has been a success story. Now, all this was done with no formal individualised funding. Okay, now 4 years ago, the Disability Services Commission started the Community Living Plan, and they had this brainstorm idea, claiming they'd got it out of thin air, saying that it would be a creative way for individuals to live in the community, whether it was with co-residents. They looked at what they called friendly neighbour schemes, and so forth. And we thought Robert needs protection. He's completely reliant on really the goodwill of our organisation. If there was another CEO, maybe the goodwill wouldn't exist or would change. And he needed to have funding attached to his name. We put in a proposal and he was immediately funded. I was informed he was the first person in Western Australia to receive this funding, and that his situation was exceptional. So his future is somewhat protected. His funding is about $25,000 a year, and this has allowed us to accommodate rent increases and to make it an attractive place for potentially for him to live. But that's not the end of the story for Robert, because Robert really is not 100% happy where he is. He started to articulate to us now that he's getting on a bit. You know, he's in his 40s. Maybe he doesn't want to live in an apartment for the rest of his life in the middle of Northbridge. And he said to us he would like a place to put his tools, his keys, to store stuff. He wants a shed. He wants a man room. Yeah? And this is despite the fact that he's got this place with the gymnasium and a swimming pool on site and so forth. He wants his little garden and his man room. And we have started to explore this with him. Also, one of his co-residents has approached his family. This is Ben, the one he's lived with for 7 years, and he's starting to talk about joint ownership of property, that is purchasing a property together with Robert and jointly owning a house, and which is a big step in Western Australia given the price of houses. But that would certainly mean a shift from Northbridge to a more kind of suburban area that they could afford. Now, these things have developed not by accident. They've developed because we have of the mode of support that we have going on in a community living situation. We know Robbie very well. We know his needs. We know his network. And we don't impose on that. We support his arrangements. Now, everything came to a climax this year. He had an interesting start to the year. He went to Bali and Malaysia for a holiday. Then 2 weeks after coming back from that, he was walking down the road in Northbridge and he had a collision with a bicycle courier. Shattered his kneecap and broke his leg. He needed 2 operations. He was on crutches for 10 weeks. And the first week, his mother decided to take it upon herself to take him to her house. She said he needs 24-hour care, 7 days a week, and that could not be provided, she said, under the community living situation. After a week, she called me and said, "Can he go back to his place? He's driving me crazy." I had enough of him. And so he went back, and his co-residents, without us prompting, without us asking them, between the two of them, they took time off work, so they would cover each other. There was always someone there when he was at home. And where there was a gap, we just increased our support to cover those gaps. So, and for us that was an increase from maybe 10 hours of a person visiting during the week on average, to maybe 15. So no big deal. And he's recovered from his broken leg, and his co-residency continues. So it's a good news story. This could have unrailed his community living situation, but it didn't. Now, with making mistakes, Robert's made a lot of mistakes over the years. The first one he made was when he lived in Subiaco. Someone knocked on the door. He opened the door, he let them in. They took a bag and about $1,500 of equipment with them, because he had no idea that you didn't open your door to strangers. He went to cafes a few times and he didn't pay, forgot to pay. He'd just walk out and not pay. But every one of those mistakes was an opportunity for him to actually grow and develop. When he walks down the road now in Northbridge past a cafe, people wave at him, they'll call out, "How are you going, Rob?" And he's known. There's a safeguard in being part of a community. Now Perth, it's a big city and not many communities exist, it's mainly suburbia. Some of these inner city places are attractive because they actually do have a sense of community about them. You become familiar with the people around you. It's a little bit different to the suburbs of Perth where no one talks to their neighbours. When you live in a strata title complex, everybody gets to know each other and they look out for each other. People know that Robert lives in that complex. Occasionally he's broken off keys in the locks and things like that. It's no big deal. The caretaker just pulls them out, and they say, "Oh, that's Rob. Rob probably did that by accident." Living in that house. He's lived now in this particular apartment for around about 8 years. One of the apartments he was in before, they sold it, and he moved from apartment number 28 to apartment number 21 within the same complex. So these have not really been big issues. Some of the organisations we come across in Perth, they spend a long time making these an issue, where the bricks and mortar, where are they going to live, with whom? We've just gone ahead and done it. Now I'd like to show you some pictures. Now you can see this is where he lives. This is the Maltings. It's actually a heritage listed building in the middle of Perth. It was built in the 1890s to make beer for the people in the goldfields, because they didn't have any water out there, but they had a lot of beer. And this has been turned into attractive apartments. That's his swimming pool. He loves his swimming pool, spends a lot of time there, not a lot of time in the gym. And these pictures were taken before a property inspection. We took them because we wanted sort of, at the beginning, some evidence that we're keeping it tidy. But I have to say, Robert is a very tidy person anyway. That's a little balcony. And he has chosen this furniture. That's his bedroom. In that box is boxes and boxes of keys. And that's Robert there at a local cafe. And here he is with Ben. I believe they're doing Skype with someone. You have to apologise. I apologise for these photos. They're not photographers. They're just great co-residents. And this is the room where they do their jamming, which is the refitted carport. Ben often takes Robert with him down south. This is about 300 kilometres down south near Margaret River. And Ben will often play in the evenings with the band, and then in the day they'll do some sort of physical sport or activity. That's Robert in Bali, in the pool, as always. And here he is at a West Coast Eagles match, which he loves going to. And this is his new co-resident, Chris. Well, he's been there 2 years. They're sharing a beer together. You can see they're ordinary blokes on their way to, at the beginning of the year, on to Malaysia. There's Robert on holiday in Thailand. And that's Jasmine, his original, the rock singer in the band. She's still, it's interesting how this has developed, because she still has a lot of contact with Robert, and she called us a few months ago saying some of his laundry wasn't being washed adequately, and she hasn't lived with them for 8 years or something like that, but she's still concerned enough to notice that sort of thing. So there's a real safeguard. I guess what I'd like you to come away with is a safeguard in having networks and friends around you, and formal network, not just the formal stuff. We would miss that, but this was picked up by a friend. The handsome chap in the middle is me. This is us doing our sightseeing in Perth, Pinnacles, a bit north of Perth. And that's actually one of his co-residents was Aidan, who was an Irish backpacker who we thought was going to fill in for 6 months, and he ended up overstaying, and we got him for a year. There's Robert in Wave Rock. Come to the west, it's interesting country. And here he is at a car show outside of York. So he does get around. And that's over in Rocknest Island. And he's walking in the local park. You know, Robert does a lot of walking. He enjoys walking. People say Northbridge is a dangerous spot. Not for Robert. It's a safe spot. He's well known in the area, and he's never been attacked or threatened or anything like that. We've taken a risk by him living there. And he likes his cuppa. So really, in conclusion, I just wanted to say that I encourage people just to do it, to take the step. Don't let the funding be an obstacle. Okay, there's a lot you can do without funding, and look for people who are going to help. There are some service providers out there with the right mindset. If you feel there needs to be some leadership in the situation, they can take on that role in a temporary phase. With our co-residents that we have supported over the years, in the co-residency situations, one man lived with co-residents for 6 years, and today he lives alone. And we provide some support for him after hours in the evening to do some cooking and cleaning and to do some social activities, but he wants to live alone. He made that very clear. Some people have evolved to situations where they decided this wasn't for them. The parents were very uncomfortable with co-residency, and after 4 years they decided they wanted their daughter in a clustered situation with sharing resources with other people with disabilities. We didn't stop that. That was their choice. We want to spend our energy with people who are really looking for the sort of service that we can provide. And I spent many years working with a family where the son was very capable, and he was interested in living in the community by himself. And in the end, his parents decided they wanted him round the corner, 300 metres away, in a group home. He was with 2 people in wheelchairs, and he's their de facto support person, essentially. I failed there. I regard that as a fail, but I console myself in saying that over the years, we've made a big difference in a few people's lives, one person at a time, as Wolfensberger says. Thank you.